technologist, any technologist or any staff that would like to be, anybody who would like to be involved as research staff at a research center like a clinic or a hospital. They need to be trained on certain things, and then of course your monitor, your CRA, or your clinical trial assistant also needs to be trained on certain aspects. It overlaps quite a lot. So the first thing, as I've mentioned, is scientific, especially for CRAs and for clinical trial assistants. They need to have scientific or clinical knowledge. That is a requirement by good clinical practice, which is the international standard that we follow in research. It's a standardized guideline that all countries where research is being conducted follow. And in South Africa, it's a requirement by law that we do follow the good clinical practice guidelines. So GCP guidelines require that clinical research associates or clinical trial assistants needs a scientific or a clinical knowledge in order to become a CRA or a CTA, the abbreviation that we use for these job descriptions. Further than that, also formal qualification. So that's that falls under your formal tertiary qualification, your scientific or clinical knowledge. Then you also need, of course, the GCP training, because GCP, now we have two types of GCP. We have the international standard that all countries around the world follow. But then South Africa very uniquely have their own GCP guidelines, the South African GCP guidelines. And according to the Medicines Related Substances Act, we have to follow both these sets of guidelines in South Africa when we conduct research. So you need to be trained on the guidelines, because if you're not trained on the guidelines, you don't know what the requirements are. So, so you need the GCP training, and that is really basic training which gives you a very good foundation of how research should be conducted. It's also more of a practical guideline, like a recipe when you bake a cake. It gives you practical guidance on how research should be conducted. So that is a requirement by the authorities in South Africa, that everybody that's involved in research needs to be trained on GCP. And also every 3 years, they need to be retrained on GCP. So in the industry, we have a basic course, which we call a GCP introduction course, which could be a 1-day or a 2-day course. And usually it has to be presented face-to-face in South Africa. The authorities does not accept online training for the basic course. Then you also get the GCP refresher course, which is a shorter course, about half a day or so. But it really depends on the training vendor. Some can be 1 day. And you can also do these trainings online, or you can attend it face-to-face. So that's GCP training, okay, as a basic foundation for conducting research. And everybody worldwide to conduct research need GCP training as a basic. Then also research ethics training is important. And in South Africa, we don't have any well, the requirement has been put out there in a guidance policy for us that everybody needs research ethics training. However, the authorities is not, or not all authorities are enforcing it at this point in time, but I think they are coming and working towards that, because that's a requirement since 2015, that everybody who conducts research also needs research ethics training. Then on top of that, you also need more further certification or informal training, such as your very specific, uniquely to your clinical trial that you will conduct. So you would need protocol training, for example. So every protocol is different, every research methodology is different, and you will be trained. And of course, the training needs to be documented, because research is evidence-based. And the principle also serves here that if the training is not documented, it didn't happen. So in the case of protocol training, where you don't attend a formal course like GCP, the training will be self-documented, such as on an attendance register, or the person who is doing the training would document the training themselves on a cumulative training log. So it really depends what is the requirement for the company that you work or the site where you work. Now, that being said, that requirement from the company and the site where you work would be documented and required in a standard operating procedure. So every clinical research center needs to have standard operating procedures. That's also a requirement by GCP. And the standard operating procedures would then describe for that particular center the details of what training is required, how the training will be documented. Maybe there's a standard template to record the training, and that would be described in the standard operating procedure. There's very many standard operating procedures, and every company, every pharmaceutical company, every clinical research organization or a CRO have their own standard operating procedures, and usually the first few days of work is you're bombarded with the standard operating procedures to read through it. Usually it's self-reading, and then of course that needs to be documented as part of your training record. So that is then the GCP training. So you need your scientific qualification, you need GCP training, and that's both ICH GCP, South African GCP training, as well as then your standard operating procedure training, your research protocol training, and any other task that you will perform. So if you are a clinical research associate or a monitor, your company will train you to be a monitor. So sometimes you go on a formal course. I myself, for monitoring work, had my course way back 20 years ago in Germany. Or the company, can send you on a monitoring, on a CRA course, which you can attend, which is a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Some courses have practicals where they outsource you to do some practical work at pharma companies to get the experience as well and to assess you. But also then there could be all sorts. So every company may differ in that regard. If you work for a CRO, some CROs, if you are research naive and you don't have experience in research, they may initially appoint you as a CTA or a clinical trial assistant, and then you can work yourself up to a CRA or a monitor's position. That's required by the company for the clinical trial assistant to do and to work towards a clinical trial associate or a clinical research associate. Once you become a clinical research associate, the training never ends. Hey? The training never ends for any of us. So then you have your very specific prescribed by each company training that you require. When you work for a clinical research site or a clinic or a hospital, then the principal investigator, who's basically the head researcher, if I can explain it like that, would determine what your role will be in the study and what tasks you will be performed in the study. And those tasks needs to be documented on a very specific form, which the GCP guidelines describe and prescribe for us. Now, for every task that you delegated to do, you need to have training. And I would like to explain it like this. You cannot draw blood from a patient if you've never learned how to draw blood. So for any task that you will be assigned to perform, for example, you're a lab technician and you're going to work in the laboratory. So for this specific protocol research study that you're going to conduct, there's certain requirements to spin and to prepare the blood specimen, for example. So you will be trained on that, okay? You will be trained if you're a data capturer. You will be trained on the system in which you will record and capture the data. You will receive training for that. You will receive a certificate as proof that you've received training. If you are a research nurse, you also need a license to show that you are a registered research nurse. People whose researchers, whose medical doctors, needs to be registered with the HPCSA, the Health Professions Council. They need to have malpractice insurances. So their licenses also serve as part of the qualification which they require to conduct research. So further then, experience is also important, and everybody start from scratch. We all didn't have experience when we started in research, but as you carry on with your experience, so as a clinical trial assistant, you gain experience, and that helps you to transform into a clinical research associate, for example, or at a clinical trial site. You can have, I've seen in my life, it could be junior nurses, or it could be a receptionist that gain so much experience that they later on can start performing some of the research tasks, very specific for the research. But the bottom line, and in summary, is that everybody who's involved in research needs to be adequately qualified. That's what we said. Qualification includes your tertiary qualification, and that must be in a scientific or a clinical background. That also includes formal trainings or informal trainings. It can include mentoring. It can include experience. It could include self-reading. For example, a site staff, a research nurse is assigned to obtain informed consent from potential research participants. And such a research nurse, of course, first have to read through the informed consent document so that they can familiarize themselves with the content of the consent document before they discuss it with a participant, right, or a potential research participant. So that self-reading through the document needs to be documented, because if it's not documented, we assume that she's never read through the document. So, so that's quite important that you understand today that you need to be adequately qualified. There was lots of questions last week about qualification. I really hope that this has clarified some of the questions that hasn't been clarified or that you still had this week, but that you also understand all training needs to be documented. So whatever you do, you need to prove that you have been trained to the authorities and, of course, to researchers and for inspection and record purposes, because we can't remember when we've been trained. So we need to know when we've been trained on a protocol, on a consent document, specific procedures. And then, what I also would like to just add is that training never ends. I've mentioned it before. So we trained, we get into the role, we execute the tasks, and then maybe we make an error. Then you may receive retraining. So training never ends. You keep on learning in this industry all the time. I don't know if there's any questions, Victor. That's basically in summary what I would have liked to just mention here. I see there's a question.
Thank you so much, Rieta, for the lovely presentation and taking your time to come and share this information with everyone that's attending this webinar. I see we have one question, and if you do have a question, please use the Q&A section just to send through your questions, and Rieta will be able to respond to them. But just maybe one question from my side before you start answering the questions in the Q&A. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to find out, so if you maybe have a social sciences background and you want to work in research, can you do that?
So thank you, Victor, for the question. There is indeed people that's been qualified in social science that has been appointed as a clinical research associate. So yes, indeed, that also, because remember, we also do social science research. There's many research studies. So research does not just, what I've mentioned now was also research which is, I think, the top of the range, which is clinical research, drug research, device research on human subjects. But it also depends what research, because if you do device studies, for example, now a device could be a lens that's implanted in your eye. It could be a pacemaker, for example. I mean, anything is a device. These cups that patients urinate in to provide a urine sample to the doctor, that's a device. And that also needs to be tested, believe it or not. So it really depends in which area you are looking. But yes, I mean, that is a scientific qualification. Yeah, for sure.
All right, thanks, Rita. I think we can now go to the Q&A section.
Good. I can see them. So I see Gomo has asked the first question. Does one go and get GCP training by themselves privately, or does the company organize all the trainings once you work for them? Gomo, I don't have a clear-cut answer for you there to say yes or no. What I can tell you is, and Victor, I hope it's allowed. I'm sponsoring also one of the sponsors for this webinar, so maybe I can say that I do offer GCP training. I am a GCP training provider, and I do get many, very often, I have people who's research naive, who wants a career change. I had that this week, again, in the training, and then they would like to attend the GCP training, and then, you know, to put themselves out in the market to start looking for research jobs. What I can say, Gomo, is I think, you know, if I was the employer, and maybe I see Charnel Engelbrecht is on the line as well, also one of the sponsors of this webinar. Maybe Charnel can also just indicate in the question and answer section to us, but I think she will confirm that if I'm the employer and Charnel is the employer and we are looking for staff and you have GCP already, I think that's a plus point. GCP training is not that expensive. It is some of the cheaper trainings. It's much cheaper to do GCP training, for example. Cost us around 2,000 Rand per delegate for a one-day course, whereas a CRA training costs you about 14, 15, 16, 20,000 Rand. And then you still don't have a job. So I think it's better to invest in the 2,000 Rand, do the GCP training. And the good thing of that is also because then you get an idea what the research is about. Gomo, you won't believe that I had pharmacists, qualified pharmacists, who worked for years in pharmacies, and they all of a sudden then become involved in research, and they come and they attend the course. And then they're astonished because they didn't know that is how medicine has been developed and how medicine gets to the market. I mean, Corona is a very good example here because we all want a vaccine against COVID-19. And everybody says, oh, in the next 2 years. But what they don't understand is the process that this drug has to go through. And that's everything that we discuss in the GCP training. And you can learn so much during the GCP training. You can even see that there's more positions than just CRA work, for example. You don't have to be a monitor. There's CTA work. You can work at the research center. Often we have clinical trial coordinators who become a clinical research associate or a clinical research manager, you know, that has seen the site from the site as well as site's perspective as well as for the pharma company. So it's really up to you. It may take some time for you to find, and I see anonymous attendee has also indicated in the second question and says the CTA jobs require experience. It is indeed so because companies don't really have the time to train people. But you have to look harder, Anonymous, because there are companies that definitely employ people who doesn't have experience. I myself has been employed 20 years ago, naively from the university, and my boss at the time only employed people from the university. He said he doesn't want anybody with experience because then they're too clever and he wants to train them. And I think that was wonderful because that was the best training ever. You know, that he trained me every single step. So there are still companies out there that that employs people who doesn't have experience, and definitely in the CTA positions as well. So maybe you should just look a little bit harder. Maybe you should make contact with personnel agents to find them. And then my question would be, you know, have you done GCP training? Because if you've done GCP training, that will also help you to answer some of the questions in the interviews, because then you've got background information and you know more or less what it entails. So if they ask you or they give you a scenario that you can relate to that. So so Gomo, you can do it privately or you can do it through a company. I think it looks better if you've done it privately. Don't rely on the company. We don't want a job and ask somebody to employ us and only then we start to study dietetics or start to sign lung function technology or whatever, or become a medical doctor once we only have a job. We first get the qualification and then so you will be rewarded. Your 2,000 Rand will jump back into your pocket the moment that you get your job and you know, and you applied for a nice job and you get it. So so I think you should consider doing it maybe privately if you still want to apply. And then I hope that has answered your question. And then for Anonymous, so you said about the experience. Can you perhaps advise on how one can get this experience? And as I'm a medical science degree, you've got a medical science degree, that's perfect. I would advise you to do GCP training. Chanel, please add. I see Chanel has said, yes, I agree, because some knowledge of the industry does stand out because clinical trials is quite different arm to medical field. So Chanel agrees with me. Chanel is an MD at a clinical research center, a site that conducts research. So she works with the doctors, the nurses who sees the patients. And she also says, don't wait for the employer, but you know, get out there and I really think you should you know, get some background information on what it entails. The last thing that you want is apply for a job, get a job, accept the job, and then it was completely not what you've expected. So I really think you know, it's maybe something for you to consider. Are there any other questions? Let me just scroll down. Sorry, the cat just wants to say hello. She's also GCP trained. Portia, please do share the details of how we can access your GCP training. Portia, you're very welcome. My company's name is Be Compliant. You can just type it in on Google and it will bring up the website and you can make contact with me through the website and then I'll give you a buzz. You're very welcome. The training is also practical, so I give practical examples so that you really can relate it, so that you can see whether this is for you or not. Just mentioned that volunteering at the site for experience also. Yes, Chanel is mentioning a very important point. And maybe this is something for Anonymous who wants to be a CTA. Anonymous, maybe you can also make contact with Chanel Engelbrecht. Contact Victor, and then Victor can bring you in contact with Chanel. If you would like to volunteer, you've got a medical science background now, you've got the qualification, maybe you can volunteer to, for free, you know, without payment, do some tasks and get involved with the site so that you can see what it is about. And that's also experience which is very valuable. What you should remember is, and that I've learned from my Standard 7 way back years ago, my Standard 7 Afrikaans teacher, she always said, you write your own CV. And sometimes you have to do it for free, just that you get it on your CV. So that's quite important. Thank you very much, Chanel, for mentioning that. And I think, you know, if you can get in contact with Chanel, who's a clinical research site, and you can also chat to her and see if there's something that you can assist with at the trial, and you know, without payment, in your free time, or with very little payment, just for some time, so that you can get the experience, because that's what you say that you need, right? And that will help you a great deal. That's a very good idea. Good. So thank you, Gomu. Thank you, Anonymous. Thank you for volunteering, and I promise you this will really help you. So please make contact with Chanel. And Chanel gave the yes there, and she said we're very willing to assist candidates at the site to get exposure. I think that's a brilliant idea. So I don't know if there are any other questions.
Thank you so much, Rita, for taking all these questions and succinctly clarifying each question. So the feeling is that they will be looking for your contact information. So my email and my cell phone number is on the advert that you saw on LinkedIn. So if you can get in touch with me, I can give you Chanel's contacts, and I can also give you Rita's contacts, and you can get in touch with them. Cindy did ask a question in the chat option to ask if you do conduct your training face-to-face, or do you do it via Zoom during this lockdown? So maybe you can answer that question quickly, and then we can close it off.
So, so yes, it is. We are allowed by the authorities. The South African Health Products Regulatory Authority has granted us permission that during this lockdown time we can do the training alternatively than face-to-face. However, I strictly believe I do not have online courses. I investigated it last year, but I do believe that face-to-face is the better option. And because you can share examples, it's interactive. So in short, yes, I do it via Zoom exactly like this, except that everybody would be able to speak. It's interactive. It will be exactly the same as a face-to-face course. The only difference is you're not sitting in my office. You are sitting in the comfort of your own house or office, and we do it, we discuss it. So there's a little test that you write at the end to assess you, but it's open book. You do it in a group. I give you all the questions throughout the course. So it is a live course. It's not presentations that you stare at. So, so we do it via Zoom at this point in time, and that would be until the end of the year. The training dates for the courses are all on the website, on the Be Compliant website.
Okay, thank you so much, Rita. I will share your information with everyone that sends me an email, and they will get in touch with you for training. So thank you guys for joining this webinar. I would like to acknowledge Be Compliant and FCRN for making this webinar possible. Thank you for your contributions and your support in sponsoring this webinar. And we will see you again next week with another presentation. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you all. Keep safe and warm. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.